$64,000 question is how do you bring this conflict to an end? And it just seems to me that the Israelis are going to have to cut a deal with the Palestinians. There's going to have to be some sort of Palestinian state in both Gaza and the West Bank.
Who would you like them to cut the deal with, John?
Well, as Peter said, you're going to have to put together a coalition government involving Hamas and Fatah, and you're going to have to change Hamas's thinking on the existence of a Jewish state, much the way Arafat's thinking was changed. There's no question that you're going to have to work to create a partner on the other side. I mean, you have a bit of a partner now with Fatah and with Mahmoud Abbas, but that by itself is not enough. But the fact of the matter is, if there's no two-state solution, you're going to end up with a greater Israel that's an apartheid state. Ehud Olmert has said that. If you don't have a two-state solution, you'll end up in a South Africa-like situation. And that means that this kind of business will go on forever and ever. And that will be disastrous for Israel and even for the United States and certainly for the Palestinians. So we have to figure out some way to solve the basic problem so that this particular problem goes away.
Let me get Derek Pinsler to follow up on that. Go ahead.
I agree we need to solve the problem, but we have to keep in mind that not only is there the difficulty of getting the Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas together on the same page, but the difficulty also for Benjamin Netanyahu holding together a government that's very fragile, where really any policy other than this kind of constant aggressiveness which neither capitulates to the dovish or Pacific forces in Israel or in the rest of the world, but also doesn't go all the way, as some on the far right in Israel would like. Any other course than what Netanyahu's following now could actually lead to a collapse of the government. And Israel is a democratic country, however flawed its polity is. It is a democracy. So we're dealing with a lot of huge challenges, which makes me think of the famous line about sometimes there are turning points when history fails to turn. And despite all the goodwill expressed this evening that history seems to be approaching a turning point, the obstacles are very, very big.
I do want to remind our viewers that we are going to get to the main issue that we advertised in the opening tonight, which is there a lessening of support? Well, there appears to be a lessening of support. Let's find out how significant it is among the North American Jewish diaspora for the Jewish state, and we will get to that once we've kind of dealt with some of these issues about the flotilla and the blockade. David, you look like you wanted to get in and follow up.
Well, Steve, you begin the program by talking about Jews and how they feel about it. So, since I believe three of us on the panel tonight are Jews, Peter, myself, and well, I shouldn't assume it. I know Peter and I are. I shouldn't assume about anybody else.
Well, actually, should we nail that down right now? Peter is, David is, Derek is, John?
No.
Is not. Okay. Continue on.
But I'm going to I'll take advantage of that three-quarters majority to tell a Jewish joke. Back from the old country, Shlomo the carpenter in the shtetl has an unmarriageable son, and the village matchmaker comes to him with a bright idea. She has found a girl for his unmarriageable son, and that girl is the daughter of Lord Rothschild in Vienna. Shlomo is taken aback by this proposition and begins to raise objections. Well, don't they live very far away? No, they're extremely wealthy. They can afford train tickets. But aren't they terribly assimilated? And no, you're thinking of the Rothschilds in London. The Viennese Rothschilds keep very strict kosher. And one by one, she knocks down every objection until finally he says, all right, proceed with my blessing. And she says, great, that's half the job done. As I listen to all of these plans to mobilize Hamas into a national unity government, I think, okay, well, it's like that, right? I mean, there's no question that if Israel encountered a peace offer from the Palestinians, this quarrel could have been closed in 1937. It could have been closed before it started. The reason we have this quarrel is because all of these fancy ideas have been tried and failed and repudiated because they bump up against a rejectionism which is grounded in this political fact, which is the minimal demands that any Palestinian government has to project in order to survive are so much greater than the maximum concessions that any Israeli state can concede and preserve its security. That was a thing that led to armed conflict in the year 2000, when everybody thought, including me, that we were on the verge of a real peace, and the Israelis made a huge offer to the Palestinians. Yasser Arafat, some people say the offer wasn't quite everything that Arafat could possibly have wanted, but instead of responding with a counteroffer, he chose war. And
okay,
he did that
David,
because his back was against the wall.
I got two people who want to play the role of Shlomo the carpenter as they respond to your joke. So, okay, Peter, go ahead. You first.
Look, I think if David is saying that Palestinians have missed a lot of opportunities, he's absolutely right. but I think there's a lack of Israeli agency in his story. I mean, in 2002, the Arab League basically said the entire Arab world would accept Israel if Israel returned to 1967 borders. I'm not necessarily sure Israel should have taken that offer, but where has Israel's response been to that? Has Israel responded in a creative way to that response? Has Israel, we have in Salam Fayyad, I think by any standard, the best Palestinian leader that Israel has ever seen. Can anyone say that Israel has really done everything it could to try to strengthen his position, a guy who is genuinely committed to nonviolence, who wants to do the kind of institution building that should have been done long ago in the Palestinian territories? Yes, the Palestinians have missed a lot of opportunities, and there are still powerful rejectionist elements. But let's not kid ourselves. There are powerful rejectionist elements in Israel that are doing everything they can every day to foreclose the possibility of a Palestinian state, and we have to be worried about that too.
Okay, it's interesting how we actually didn't plan to or intend to talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict tonight per se and the history of all that, but it seems many times on this program when we want to talk about other things, it somehow gets back to that all the time. But let's just finish this circle here. We'll give John a chance to respond to that, we'll give Derek a chance to respond to that, and then we'll move on to Israel's new Jewish critics. Okay, John, you're up next.
I just wanted to say a few words about the present Israeli government and its views on a two-state solution. We're going to talk about the article that Peter wrote,
yes,
that appeared in the New York Review of Books, but one of the central themes in that book is that if you look at the composition of the Israeli government today, it's quite clear that nobody in that government is interested in a serious way in a two-state solution. Netanyahu has been opposed to giving the Palestinians a state of their own since the beginning, and his government is filled with people of that sort. And in fact, Tzipi Livni, who got more votes than Netanyahu in the recent election, refused to join the Netanyahu coalition because of her disagreement with him over the idea of creating a Palestinian state. So there's huge resistance inside Israel. And if you look at the demographic projections in Israel for the growth of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, and you look at the settler movement and the Russian Jews and so forth and so on, the Israelis are only going to become more hardline over time. They're not going to become more amenable to a two-state solution. So you may have problems on the Palestinian side, but I would argue you have problems that are as big, if not bigger, on the Israeli side. And the end result is you're not going to get a two-state solution. You're going to get a greater Israel.
And that's actually going to lead us nicely to Peter's article, but first, Derek, you get the last word on this.
Well, just to sew things up, the fact is that at the time of the First Intifada, Sari Nusseibeh and Mark Heller wrote a book called No Trumpets, No Drums, where they proposed a two-state solution. In Israel, it was considered heretical, and the American Jews considered it heretical too. Consistently, a majority of Israelis, even today, have favored a two-state solution. The previous Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, said so quite explicitly, and even Benjamin Netanyahu, again, gritting his teeth, but several months ago in a speech at Bar-Ilan University, spoke of the need to establish a Palestinian state. It's not pretty. Negotiations about borders and refugees and other key issues remain. But the fact is there is a consensus in Israel about Palestinian nationhood and national rights, and that consensus did not exist 20 years ago.
Okay. Having set the table for the discussion that is to come, here is the discussion that is to come. I want to take just about a minute here and go through some of the main headlines that have been on this issue over the last, well, let's even go back about 7 or 8 years right now. And Michael, if you would, we'll bring these headlines up and then we'll start talking at the end of it. New York Review of Books, Tony Judd, 2003. He writes that the Jewish diaspora cannot influence Israeli policy but is being identified with it, meaning that Israel's bad behavior is bad for Jews anywhere and everywhere. Follow up. In 2007, Mearsheimer, one of our guests tonight, and Walt write the Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, which argue that a group of American organizations encourages the U.S. government to support the policies of the Israeli government. That's about as benign an interpretation of his book, which was extremely controversial, that I'll put on things. Let's keep going. The Atlantic puts it this way: sick of the Israelis and the Palestinians. So said blogger and author Andrew Sullivan, that he was, quote, sick of the Israelis for their contempt for the interests of their most important ally, their continuation of brutalizing colonization of the West Bank, their shameless ethnic engineering in East Jerusalem, their pulverization of Gaza, and so on, and so on, and so on. Then we get to February 8th, 2010, Leon Wieseltier in the New Republic, responding to several of Sullivan's posts, saying he was either bigoted or moronically insensitive. And then comes the big piece by Peter Beinart, which I guess was the most significant one of this latest round, May 12, 2010, New York Review of Books, Peter arguing that the Israeli government is both becoming more orthodox religiously and shifting to the right politically, and therefore young American Jews and liberal North American Jews are feeling less and less connected to the Jewish state. Followed up a couple of weeks later by David Frum on the program tonight, replying that liberal American Jews are drifting from Israel because they are substituting wishful thinking for real analysis. Okay, that brings us to tonight. And Peter, let me go back to you because, as I suggested, your piece really was the, I guess, you know, the straw that stirred the drink, I guess, if I can use an old New York Reggie Jackson analogy there. Give us the thesis of your piece, essentially, about what your fears are with Israel becoming more orthodox religiously, more right-wing politically.
My fears are that liberal Zionism in the United States, by which I mean a Zionism that loves Israel, not only because it's a Jewish state, but because it's a liberal, democratic Jewish state, is really in dramatic decline. That younger secular American Jews, and most younger American Jews are secular, feel much less attachment to Israel than do their parents and grandparents. That's partly because of assimilation, but it's also very significantly, I think, because the kind of Zionism that is on offer from the organized U.S. Jewish community is a Zionism that says that you should not publicly criticize Israel. And that is simply not a Zionism that is consistent with the liberal values of most, particularly younger American Jews, at a time when the Israeli government is run by people who have such distinctly illiberal and even authoritarian tendencies.
David Frum, why do you feel that that somehow misses the boat?
I don't think it does. What Peter said, strictly speaking, what he said just now, I don't think that does miss the boat. I am imagining how much, I know Peter pretty well, I can only imagine how much he is squirming in his chair and having his article identified with Tony Jutz and John Mearsheimer's, which are not exactly two high points of recent discourse. I suspect, I know that Peter is somebody who is committed to the safety and security of Israel, and that I'm not sure can be said of those others. I think, though, where Peter's analysis takes us only so far is to understand that what is going on here is a change in both liberal and conservative America, period. The biggest change, the biggest development in public opinion about Israel over the past decade has been this extraordinary long-term rise in support for Israel and the shrinkage of the undecideds among Americans, period, of all ethnicities. And indeed, in some ways, it is becoming stronger among non-Jewish Americans. A recent poll, a very serious poll by Gallup, which does good work, found that when asked the question, is Barack Obama a good friend of Israel, about half of American Jews said yes. Only about a third of American Catholics said yes, and only about a quarter of American Protestants said yes. Israel is not just a Jewish cause in the United States. What is also happening is that liberal America which is fairly small. Liberal America is about a fifth of the country. Liberal America is moving away from Israel. And to the extent that North American Jews and American Jews participate in liberal America, then they're caught in that undertow too. That, however, is not to Israel's discredit. I think it is to liberalism's discredit.
Okay, John Mearsheimer, I don't know if you want to, first of all, respond to David Frum's suggestion that you really don't care that much about Israel's security. You want to do that one first and then tell us what you think of the Beinart thesis?
Yeah, well, Steve Walt and I have made it clear in all of our writings and on countless occasions that in public that we think it's wonderful that there is a Jewish state, and we fully support the state or the existence of the state of Israel and believe that the United States should come to Israel's support if its survival is threatened. But we believe, contrary to many people in the lobby, that Israel is a normal state, and as a normal state, it sometimes does foolish things, and that the United States, to include people like us, should be able to criticize Israel without being called anti-Semites. That's our basic view on this issue.
For the record here, hang on, just for the record, I don't think David said that about you. I think he just questioned whether you believed Israel's security. We should just get that.
No, I'm just saying that's the general charge
that's the general. Okay.
That leveled at us time after time.
Now, on Peter's thesis, what do you say to that?
Oh, I think that Peter's thesis is right on the money. I think there's no question that if you look at what's happening inside Israel, that it is moving to the right, and it is engaged in all sorts of activities that are fundamentally illiberal. I mean, I think the taproot of the problem is the occupation, and I think if the occupation ended, a lot of these problems would go away. But I think his assessment of what's going on inside Israel is correct, and I think his assessment of the Jewish community in the United States or North America more generally is correct. And there's a lot of survey data that supports it. And the problem is that with the passage of time, Israel, as he points out in the piece, is likely to get more hardline or more right-wing or more liberal, whatever phrase you want to use, while at the same time the American Jewish community is likely to get more liberal, and therefore you're going to have something of a divorce.
Derek, let's follow up right from there. We actually saw in this community, in this city, this past weekend, Benjamin Netanyahu came, he kicked off that Walk for Israel at a hockey arena with, I think, what, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people there, something like that, maybe even more. Rock star treatment is everything I read in the newspapers. Right. As Israel